No one bet a penny on the humble trainer's old horse. But when the animal looked into his eyes and did that, everyone was left speechless. Miguel Ramirez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished cleaning the last stall in the Bluegrass Elite Farm stables. The late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, painting golden rectangles on the freshly swept concrete floor. At 26, Miguel carried on his shoulders the weight of his heritage and the weariness of a life of hard labor. His lean body, weathered by the Kentucky sun, concealed a strength born of necessity and a sensitivity few understood. He leaned the pitchfork against the wall and stretched his back, wincing at the familiar ache. 14 hours on his feet, and the day wasn't over yet. His father would be waiting in their small cabin at the edge of the property, needing help with dinner and his evening medications. "All done in there, Mexican?" John Simmons, the stable manager, peered through the doorway, his pale eyes scanning the stall for any overlooked imperfection. "Yes, sir," Miguel answered, keeping his voice neutral despite the casual slur. "All 20 stalls cleaned and fresh bedding down." Simmons grunted, disappointed at finding no reason for criticism. "Wheeler wants you back at dawn tomorrow. Says there's a special assignment." Miguel nodded, watching Simmons swagger away before allowing his shoulders to slump. Special assignment usually meant the dirtiest, most dangerous work, the jobs no one else would take. As he gathered his tools, soft nickering drew his attention to the elegant bay mare in the adjacent stall. Duchess, a retired broodmare, stretched her neck over the partition, ears pricked forward hopefully. "Lo siento, beautiful lady," Miguel whispered, reaching into his pocket for the apple he'd saved from lunch. "I didn't forget you." The mare's velvety lips tickled his palm as she delicately accepted the offering. Miguel stroked her sleek neck, remembering how his father had done the same. Before the accident 5 years ago that left Ramon Ramirez wheelchair-bound, his spine crushed beneath the hooves of a stallion spooked by a careless handler's shout. "Mi abuelo would say you have old eyes, Duchess," he murmured in the mixture of English and Spanish that felt most natural when he spoke to the horses. "Eyes that see beyond what people pretend to be." The mare's gentle breathing synced with his own, a moment of connection that made the exhaustion of the day momentarily recede. These quiet exchanges were what sustained him through the endless labor and casual indignities of being the Mexican help at Kentucky's most prestigious thoroughbred farm. Night had fallen by the time Miguel made his way down the dirt path to the weathered cabin that Wheeler's farm provided as part of his compensation. A single light glowed through the window. His father would be awake, probably reading one of his dog-eared paperbacks of Garcia Marquez or Cervantes, holding on to the literature of home, even after 20 years in Kentucky. Before reaching the cabin, Miguel veered off the path, moving silently through the darkness toward the neighboring property. Bluegrass Elite shared a fence line with Meadowbrook Farm, a once prosperous operation now fallen on hard times. Their south stable stood mostly empty, housing only a few forgotten animals, rejects deemed not worth their keep. Miguel slipped through a gap in the fence he'd discovered years ago, his battered guitar case clutched to his chest. The night air carried the scent of rain coming, and crickets pulsed their rhythmic chorus from the tall grass. The abandoned section of Meadowbrook's stables was quiet and dark. Miguel moved from memory, stopping before the last stall where an aging Appaloosa stood with head hanging low. The horse had been left behind when its owner went bankrupt, deemed too old for sale, too expensive to maintain, but not yet bad enough off to justify the cost of euthanasia. "Hola, Manchado," Miguel whispered, settling on an upturned bucket outside the stall. "Did you miss our music?" He unlatched the case and withdrew his grandfather's guitar, the wood worn smooth by decades of hands. After a few quiet moments of tuning, his fingers found the opening notes of an old Mexican lullaby his mother used to sing. The spotted horse lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the sound. By the third measure, he had moved closer to the stall door, his breathing slowing as the music filled the empty space. Miguel sang softly in Spanish, words about starlight and protection, about guardian angels watching over sleeping children. As he played, he observed the subtle shifts in the horse's posture, the easing of tension in his withers, the softening around his eyes. After 3 songs, Miguel set the guitar aside and simply talked, telling Machado about his day, about his father's improving health, about the new foals born at Bluegrass Elite. The horse listened with pricked ears, occasionally nickering softly as if in response. Mi abuelo dizia que cavalos feridos são espelhos das nossas almas, he said, switching to the Portuguese his grandfather had spoken. He said wounded horses are mirrors of our souls. They know who else carries scars. The rain began to fall, a gentle patter on the metal roof. Miguel reluctantly packed away his guitar. Before leaving, he slipped a handful of carrots through the bars, watching as Machado accepted them with surprising delicacy. Hasta mañana, amigo, he promised, knowing he would return the following night, as he had for months. These secret visits to the forgotten horses of neighboring farms had become his private ritual, a way to honor his grandfather's legacy while preserving his own humanity in a place that often treated him as just another piece of equipment. The main house of Bluegrass Elite Farm stood on a gentle rise, its white columns and expansive porches glowing with warm light as Harrison Wheeler III entertained his weekly gathering of racing industry elites. Miguel approached from the side entrance, having been summoned to bring up a special bottle of bourbon from the cellar for Wheeler's guests. Through the French doors, he could see the assembled wealth of Kentucky's thoroughbred aristocracy, men in tailored suits and women dripping with subtle diamonds, all gravitating around Wheeler like satellites around a sun. Wheeler stood before the marble fireplace, tumbler in hand, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tanned face set in practiced lines of confidence and authority. At 62, he carried himself with the assurance of a man who had never questioned his place at the top of the hierarchy. The bloodline is impeccable, Wheeler was saying as Miguel slipped quietly into the room with the requested bottle on a silver tray. Storm cloud on the sire's side. You'll remember he took the Derby by 3 lengths in '98. The dam is Northern Duchess, who gave us 3 stakes winners already. The guests murmured appreciatively, and Wheeler's smile widened as he spotted Miguel. Ah, here we are. Thank you, boy. He took the bottle without looking at Miguel directly. Ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a treat. But first, I want to show you the future king of Churchill Downs. Wheeler led his guests toward the adjoining conservatory where a large screen had been set up. Miguel began to withdraw, but Wheeler's voice stopped him. Stay and refill glasses as needed, he ordered, before turning back to his guests with renewed warmth. What you're about to see is Thunderstorm's training run from yesterday morning. My friends, this colt moves like liquid midnight. The video began playing, showing a magnificent black thoroughbred with a small white star on his forehead, moving with breathtaking power and grace around Bluegrass Elite's training track. Even on the screen, the animal's presence was commanding, his stride perfectly balanced, his neck arched proudly, his dark eyes alert with intelligence. My God, Harrison, breathed a heavy-set man in a cream-colored suit. He's spectacular. 2-year-old, already running quarter miles in 22 flat, Wheeler said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. We're looking at a Triple Crown contender, gentlemen, and he's not for sale at any price. Miguel watched the horse on screen with professional admiration. The animal was indeed exceptional, a perfect blend of power and refinement, with the kind of presence that turned heads even among people who knew nothing about horses. As the guests exclaimed and offered congratulations, Miguel circulated silently with the bourbon, refilling glasses. He had glimpsed Thunderstorm in person only once, from a distance. The valuable colt was handled exclusively by Wheeler's top trainers and grooms, not by ordinary stable hands like himself. What's your reserve price, Harrison? Asked a woman in a sapphire dress, her Texas accent thick as honey. Everyone has one. Wheeler laughed. Not for this one, Elaine. Thunderstorm is my legacy horse. In 30 years breeding thoroughbreds, I've never seen his equal. As the conversation continued, Miguel slipped away, having completed his task. Outside, the spring night had turned cool, and he pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders. The contrast between the warm, opulent world he had just left and the reality of his own existence struck him anew, as it often did after these glimpses into Wheeler's realm. He walked slowly back to the cabin, where his father would be waiting. wondering if men like Wheeler ever truly saw the animals they owned as anything more than beautiful machines designed to generate profit and prestige. 6 months later, Miguel was mucking stalls on a gray October morning when he heard the commotion. Raised voices, running footsteps, the slam of truck doors. He stepped outside to see the farm's horse trailer backing up to the main stable entrance. Wheeler's red Maserati parked haphazardly nearby. 2 grooms emerged from the stable, their faces grim. Behind them came Wheeler, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his expression thunderous. "Get Dr. Thornton here now," he shouted at Simmons, who was already on his phone. "And keep everyone away from that trailer when we unload him." Miguel stepped back into the shadows of the doorway, but not before catching Simmons's eye. "You, Ramirez!" Simmons beckoned sharply. "Make yourself useful. Clear out stall 20 in the isolation barn. Now!" Miguel hurried to comply, his mind racing. Stall 20 was in the small barn set apart from the main stables, usually reserved for horses with contagious conditions or those needing absolute quiet. As he worked to prepare the space, he pieced together fragments of conversation from workers passing by. Complete disaster at Churchill. Pile up in the final turn. Jockeys in the hospital. Never seen an animal so wild-eyed. By the time he finished laying fresh bedding, Miguel had deduced that something catastrophic had happened to Thunderstorm during a race. His suspicions were confirmed when Dr. Thornton, the elderly veterinarian who had served Bluegrass Elite for decades, arrived in his mud-splattered truck. Physically sound? Wheeler was demanding as the vet entered the isolation barn, Miguel still working inside the prepared stall. "How can he be physically sound?" "You saw him." Dr. Thornton sighed heavily. "The X-rays showed no fractures, Harrison. No significant soft tissue damage either. Whatever's happening is..." He tapped his temple significantly. "Psychological trauma is still trauma," the vet continued. "The pile-up, the fall, the chaos, it's affected his mind. I've seen it before in accident survivors." Wheeler paced, his expensive boots leaving muddy tracks on the concrete floor. "How long until he recovers? The Florida prep races start in 8 weeks. Dr. Thornton removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Harrison, I don't think you understand. This isn't a pulled muscle or a splint. The horse is traumatized. He's dangerous right now, to himself and others." As if to emphasize his point, a cacophony of sounds erupted outside. The clatter of hooves on metal, frantic whinnying, men shouting instructions. Miguel peered through the small window to see 6 men struggling to control a huge black horse as they attempted to guide him from the trailer into the barn. Thunderstorm was almost unrecognizable from the proud, composed animal in Wheeler's video. His coat was dark with sweat, his eyes rolling wildly, showing the whites. He reared repeatedly, striking out with his front hooves at anyone who came near. A foam of saliva flecked his chest, and his nostrils flared red with exertion. "Jesus Christ," muttered Wheeler, watching from the barn doorway. "That's $1 million animal reduced to a wild beast." Over the next 3 weeks, Miguel watched from a distance as a parade of expert trainers attempted to work with Thunderstorm. Each approached with different methods, some with gentle coaxing, others with firm discipline, one even with a complex system of rewards and punishments. All left defeated, and one left in an ambulance with 3 broken ribs. The isolation barn became a place workers avoided. Thunderstorm's stall was a constant chaos of noise, hooves battering walls, feed and water buckets overturned, bedding scattered. The magnificent animal was deteriorating before their eyes, losing weight, his once glossy coat becoming dull and rough. "We've lost a champion and gained a monster," Miguel overheard Wheeler telling Dr. Thornton one evening as they left the barn. "How much is a racehorse worth when no one can ride him, when no one can even touch him?" The veterinarian had no answer, but his expression spoke volumes. Miguel had seen that look before when euthanasia was the unspoken recommendation. On a rainy October morning, Simmons found Miguel cleaning out the main stables. The manager's expression held an unpleasant combination of amusement and malice as he dangled a set of keys. "Your lucky day, Ramirez," he announced. "Wheeler wants the isolation barn cleaned top to bottom, especially stall 20. Miguel accepted the keys silently, understanding the implication. Everyone knew Thunderstorm had become untouchable, attacking anyone who entered his space. Wheeler ordered everything prepared for tomorrow, Simmons added, his smile widening. The animal's going to the rendering plant. Be careful not to become horse food before then. As Miguel gathered his cleaning supplies and headed across the muddy yard to the isolation barn, he could hear the now familiar sound of hooves striking wood, Thunderstorm's constant protest against his confinement and trauma. Standing before the closed barn door, Miguel hesitated. The sensible approach would be to wait until tomorrow, after the horse was gone. No one would know. No one would blame him. But something, perhaps his grandfather's voice in his memory, urged him forward. Inside, the barn was dim and filled with the smell of fear, a distinctive, acrid scent that experienced horsemen recognized instantly. The sounds from stall 20 were even more violent up close. Not just anger, Miguel realized, but terror. Pure, unmitigated terror. Instead of approaching immediately, Miguel sat down on the concrete floor of the aisle, several meters from the stall door. He set his cleaning supplies aside and removed his battered guitar from its case. Without preamble, he began to play. Not the fast, cheerful corridos popular among his co-workers, but a gentle, ancient lullaby his grandmother had sung to him as a child. For nearly an hour, he simply played and sang softly, as if he were alone. Gradually, he became aware that the frantic sounds from the stall had diminished. The kicks against the wall came less frequently. The high-pitched whinnies of distress faded to occasional soft nickers. When silence finally reigned, Miguel continued playing but moved slowly closer to the stall door until he was sitting with his back against the wall adjacent to Thunderstorm's prison. No todos somos monstruos, he murmured in Spanish. Not all of us are monsters, amigo. Some of us also know pain. He spoke quietly about his grandfather, the legendary horse whisperer from Jalisco, who could calm the wildest Mustang with his voice and touch. He shared stories of his father's accident, of his mother's abandonment, of his own truncated dreams. All the while, he sensed the great animal on the other side of the wall, listening, assessing, perhaps recognizing in Miguel's voice the same loneliness that now haunted his days. Sleep now, Miguel finally whispered, playing the lullaby one last time. Tomorrow is another day, and who knows what it may bring. The next morning, Wheeler and Simmons arrived with Dr. Thornton to sedate Thunderstorm before transport to the rendering plant. What they found left them momentarily speechless. Miguel sat quietly outside the freshly cleaned stall, the door partially open. Inside, the massive black horse stood at the back, watching the newcomers with distrust, but without his usual frenzy. The stall was immaculate, fresh bedding neatly arranged, water bucket full, even the walls scrubbed clean of the marks left by angry hooves. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Wheeler bellowed, stopping at a safe distance. "I locked that gate personally yesterday." Miguel rose calmly, his expression respectful but not subservient. "I needed to enter to clean the stall, sir, as you ordered." "And you're still alive? Impossible!" exclaimed Simmons, his face reflecting genuine shock. Dr. Thornton approached cautiously, observing the abnormal behavior of the animal. "How did you get in there without being attacked?" Miguel shrugged slightly. "We just talked a little first, Doctor." Wheeler let out a harsh laugh. "Talked? Did you hear that, Thornton? Our Mexican here is a goddamn horse enchanter." While they laughed, Miguel moved slowly back into the stall. Thunderstorm watched him with alert ears, wary but contained. When Miguel extended his hand, everyone held their breath, expecting the imminent attack. Instead, the magnificent animal lowered his head slightly, and, in an almost imperceptible gesture, his nostrils flared as he sniffed Miguel's outstretched hand. He didn't allow the touch, but for the first time in months, he didn't react with violence to a human approach. Dr. Thornton let out an audible sigh. My God. Wheeler observed the scene with calculating eyes, his brain already reformulating his plans for the valuable animal. "Seems our Mexican friend has a gift after all," he said, emphasizing the word with contempt. Perhaps Thunderstorm deserves a small reprieve from his sentence. As the men walked away, Miguel remained motionless in the stall. Only when he was absolutely alone did he allow himself a small smile, whispering to the magnificent animal watching him. Gracias por confiar en mí, hermoso. We still have much work ahead of us. The first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky as Miguel approached the isolation barn, a quiet determination in his step. Last night's unexpected connection with Thunderstorm had given him a fragile hope, one he cradled carefully like a flickering flame that might extinguish with the slightest wrong move. He carried his guitar across his back, a small bag of fresh apples in one hand, and a worn paperback of Garcia Marquez in the other, simple tools for the complex task ahead. He paused at the barn door, listening. Unlike yesterday's constant cacophony of hooves against wood, today he heard only occasional shuffling, the normal sounds of a horse shifting weight. Taking a deep breath, Miguel entered quietly, moving with deliberate slowness. "Buenos dias, hermoso," he called softly before reaching Thunderstorm's stall. "It's just Miguel again." The massive black horse stood at the back of his stall, ears pricked forward, body tense but not frantic. His nostrils flared as he caught Miguel's scent, and his powerful muscles quivered beneath his dull coat. Instead of approaching immediately, Miguel settled cross-legged on the floor outside the stall, just as he had yesterday. He removed his guitar and began to play, the same lullaby, establishing continuity, creating a familiar sound landscape. Thunderstorm's ears flicked back and forth, tracking the music, his breathing gradually slowing to match the gentle rhythm. After 30 minutes of music, Miguel set the guitar aside and simply sat in silence, observing. The horse watched him with wary intelligence, his dark eyes reflecting a complex mixture of fear and cautious interest. "Your eyes remind me of my father's after his accident," Miguel said conversationally. "Always looking for the next danger, never quite believing in safety anymore." He opened his bag and took out an apple, placing it on the floor inside the stall, just beyond the threshold. Then he retreated several feet and resumed his seat, opening his book as if he had all the time in the world. An hour passed this way, Miguel reading aloud occasionally, his voice a gentle current of Spanish and English, while Thunderstorm remained at the back of his stall, the apple untouched. When Miguel finally stood to leave for his regular duties, he didn't look disappointed. "Tomorrow, amigo," he promised softly. "We have time." Each morning for the next week followed the same pattern. Miguel arrived before sunrise, spent an hour with music and quiet conversation, left an apple, and departed for his other responsibilities. By the 5th day, he would return in the evening to find the apple gone. By the 7th, Thunderstorm had begun moving closer to the front of the stall during Miguel's visits, though still maintaining a careful distance. On the morning of the 8th day, Miguel noticed someone observing him from the barn doorway, a woman he didn't recognize, clipboard in hand, her expression a mixture of curiosity and professional assessment. "Don't stop on my account," she said when Miguel paused his playing. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, the new veterinarian. Dr. Thornton finally took his retirement." Miguel nodded respectfully but returned to his music, unwilling to disrupt the delicate routine he'd established with Thunderstorm. From the corner of his eye, he saw Sarah take a seat on a hay bale, making notes as she watched their interaction. When he finally set his guitar aside, she approached cautiously, keeping her voice low. "Most trainers would have used sedatives by now," she observed. "Ropes, restraints, pressure, anything to establish control quickly." Miguel gestured toward Thunderstorm, who stood alert but relatively calm, watching them both. "Look at his eyes, Doctora. What do you see?" Sarah studied the horse thoughtfully. "Intelligence, caution, fear still, but maybe a question?" "He's been controlled enough," Miguel replied simply. "Forced, pushed, handled. Now he needs to remember he has choices." "But you're supposed to be training him," Sarah pressed. "Wheeler expects results." Miguel shook his head slightly. "I'm not training him, Doctora. We're just getting to know each other." He reached into his pocket and withdrew another apple, placing it on the stall floor, slightly closer to the center than previous days. Then he opened his book and began reading aloud. A passage about a village where people suffered from insomnia and began losing their memories. Sarah watched, fascinated, as Thunderstorm's ears pricked forward, tracking Miguel's voice. The horse took a tentative step forward, then another, drawn by something in the cadence of the words, or perhaps the stillness of the man speaking them. The voice soothes him, she noted quietly. It's not just the voice, Miguel replied, never taking his eyes from the page. It's knowing the voice will never be followed by a demand he can't understand or pain he didn't expect. Sarah made another note on her clipboard. Wheeler will want to know when you plan to touch him, to start regular handling. When he's ready, Miguel answered. His timeline, not mine. The story of Miguel's unconventional approach spread quickly through the ranks of bluegrass elite. Stable hands began stopping by during breaks, watching from a respectful distance as the Mexican horse whisperer sat reading poetry to the most dangerous animal on the property. Old-timers shook their heads, predicting failure. Younger workers watched with undisguised fascination. Wheeler, ever alert to opportunities, began bringing visitors to witness what he called the primitive method of our immigrant friend, presenting Miguel's patient approach as an exotic curiosity, something between entertainment and experiment. He doesn't use any modern techniques, Wheeler would explain to his guests with barely concealed condescension. Just music and talking, like some kind of shaman. Fascinating to observe these cultural approaches. Miguel endured these exhibitions with outward calm, though each intrusion disrupted the careful atmosphere of trust he was building. Thunderstorm, sensitive to the changing energy, would retreat to the back of his stall whenever strangers appeared. Progress temporarily halted. 3 weeks into this fragile dance of building trust, Wheeler arrived with a group of particularly important investors, men in expensive suits who spoke of horses in terms of investment returns and pedigree valuations. "How much longer until you can actually do something with that animal?" demanded one, checking his watch impatiently after 10 minutes of watching Miguel simply sit near the stall, speaking quietly in mixed Spanish and English. "Gentlemen, you're witnessing a unique cultural approach," Wheeler began his usual spiel, but the investor cut him off. "I didn't come here for a museum tour, Harrison. I came to see results. Does this method work or not?" Wheeler's smile tightened. "Miguel, perhaps you could demonstrate something more concrete for our guests. Make him respond to a command, perhaps mount him. Anything beyond this mystical mumbo-jumbo." Miguel looked calmly at his employer. "We're not ready for that yet, sir. You've been working with him for almost a month. Either show some tangible results or I'll find someone who will." Wheeler's patience had clearly run out. He reached for a riding crop hanging on the nearby wall and strode toward the stall, determined to show how it's done. Thunderstorm immediately backed away, eyes widening in panic, a high-pitched whinny of warning cutting through the air. "Mr. Wheeler, please," Miguel implored, stepping between the man and the animal. "He's frightened. Get out of my way," Wheeler ordered, raising the crop. The crack of leather against air split the silence, but before it could strike any target, Thunderstorm reared violently, forcing Wheeler to stumble backward in panic. The investors shouted and scattered, rushing for the barn exit in a chaos of expensive loafers and dropped cigars. Only Miguel remained motionless, his back to the enormous frightened animal, facing Wheeler with a look that mixed disappointment with quiet defiance. When the dust settled, the scene left everyone speechless. Thunderstorm had retreated to the corner, visibly trembling, but remained less than a yard from Miguel, as if seeking protection from the one human who had never threatened him. "Take that whip out of here," Miguel said with surprising firmness, "and don't come back with it." Wheeler, red-faced with humiliation, stormed out, followed by the embarrassed investors. Only Sarah remained behind, helping Miguel calm the agitated animal. "You realize you just confronted one of the most powerful men in Kentucky, right?" she asked, amazed by his boldness. "I understand only that he broke the trust we've spent weeks building," Miguel replied, his voice kept low to avoid further disturbing the horse. From that day forward, something shifted in the dynamics of the ranch. Older employees began seeking Miguel out during breaks, asking advice about troubled horses in their care. Younger handlers offered to cover some of his regular duties, giving him more time with Thunderstorm. Even grumpy Mr. Peterson at the local general store started setting aside the best apples for the Ramirez boys' horse. During these weeks, Thunderstorm transformed gradually. First came small signs, allowing Miguel to move closer, accepting food directly from his hand. Not startling when he sang at normal volume. Then came more significant changes. One day he surprised everyone by following Miguel through the open stall door into the adjacent small paddock, remaining calmly under the autumn sun while the young man cleaned his stable. "It's like he understands you're creating a better home for him," Sarah commented, now a regular visitor to the isolation barn, becoming an unexpected ally. "He understands respect," Miguel answered simply. "Horses don't forget who hurts them, but they also don't forget who respects them." One particularly significant afternoon, as a violent storm approached, ranch workers witnessed something extraordinary. Thunderstorm, previously terrified of thunder since his accident, began showing signs of increasing panic. Miguel, who had only recently begun briefly touching the horse's neck, a recent breakthrough, recognized the immediate danger. Instead of retreating to safety, he sat calmly in the middle of the stall and began singing softly, an old Mexican vaquero song. The first thunderclaps shook the barn walls. Thunderstorm whinnied in terror, pacing frantically within the confined space. Workers watching from safety shouted for Miguel to get out. Instead, he continued singing, slightly louder now, but making no sudden movements. When a particularly bright lightning flash illuminated the interior of the stall, followed instantly by deafening thunder, Thunderstorm froze momentarily. Then, to everyone's amazement, walked directly to Miguel, and in a gesture of astonishing vulnerability, lowered his magnificent head until it rested on the young man's shoulder. Miguel continued singing, now with silent tears streaming down his face, as he slowly raised his hand to stroke the trembling neck. Throughout the storm, they remained thus, man and animal united in a moment of absolute trust that transcended words. The following morning, Wheeler watched from the windows of the main house as Miguel led Thunderstorm on his first complete walk around the ranch perimeter. The animal followed the young man like a shadow, without halter or any physical restraint. "Impressive," murmured Jake Wilson, a wealthy Texas breeder Wheeler was trying to impress. "What would you pay for a trainer like that?" Wheeler observed the scene with a calculating expression. "It doesn't matter what I would pay. What matters is what others would pay to see this walking miracle." A week after the thunderstorm incident, Miguel was summoned to the main house, a rare occurrence that sent a ripple of speculation through the stable hands. He walked the half-mile from the isolation barn with measured steps, his work clothes freshly brushed but still bearing the unmistakable scents of hay and horse. Thunderstorm had watched him leave with pricked ears, a soft nickering following Miguel as he closed the gate. The main house loomed before him, its white columns and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the functional simplicity of the stables where he spent his days. A uniformed housekeeper led him through hallways adorned with equestrian art and racing trophies to Wheeler's oak-paneled office. "Ah, Miguel, right on time." Wheeler gestured to a leather chair opposite his massive desk. "Bourbon?" "No, thank you, sir," Miguel replied, perching uncomfortably on the edge of the chair, feeling out of place among the luxury. Wheeler poured himself a generous glass from a crystal decanter. "I have excellent news, Miguel," he announced, pronouncing the name correctly for the first time in their years of acquaintance. "The Keeneland Fall auction is coming up, and you're going to be the star." "Me, sir?" Miguel's brow furrowed in confusion. "You and Thunderstorm." Wheeler's smile didn't reach his eyes. A public demonstration of the miracle of the Mexican horse whisperer. "Then, of course, we'll auction the horse to the highest bidder." Miguel felt his stomach drop. But he's not ready for crowds yet. The noise, the pressure. "He will be." Wheeler cut him off with finality. "You have 3 weeks to ensure it. Consider yourself officially promoted to assistant trainer. with a small bonus in your salary." The words hung in the air between them. A promotion, something Miguel had dreamed of for years, now felt hollow, a consolation prize before Thunderstorm would be taken away. "Is that all, sir?" Miguel asked, his voice carefully neutral. "That's all. Make me proud, Miguel. Or rather, make me rich." Wheeler chuckled at his own joke, already turning to his computer, dismissal clear in his posture. Outside the office, Miguel found Sarah waiting, her face tense with concern. She fell into step beside him as they walked toward the stables. "I overheard everything," she confessed. "He doesn't care about the horse's well-being. He just wants to profit from the spectacle before getting rid of him." Miguel nodded, absorbing the blow. "I always knew this day would come. Thunderstorm was never mine." "And what will you do?" Miguel looked toward the isolation barn, where the magnificent black horse that trusted only him awaited his return. "The only thing I can do. Prepare him as best I can for whatever comes after me." The following days took on a new urgency. Miguel crafted a careful regimen to gradually expose Thunderstorm to more stimuli, first having 2 stable hands stand quietly at a distance, then adding more people, introducing new sounds, expanding their walks to more open areas. The horse responded with growing confidence, as long as Miguel remained nearby. "You're using systematic desensitization," Sarah observed one morning, watching Miguel walk Thunderstorm past fluttering laundry deliberately hung near the paddock. "That's textbook behavioral therapy." Miguel shrugged. "My grandfather called it teaching the horse that new things aren't always dangerous. I didn't know it had a scientific name." Sarah smiled. "Your instincts align with modern veterinary behavioral science more than you realize." Though Thunderstorm made steady progress, Miguel worried constantly about the looming auction. At night, after finishing his regular duties and checking on his father, he would return to the isolation barn, sometimes simply sitting in silence with the horse, their breathing synchronizing in the darkness. "I don't know what kind of people will buy you," he confessed one night, stroking the horse's neck. "I don't know if they'll understand what you've been through, what you need." Thunderstorm lowered his head, nuzzling Miguel's shoulder as if offering comfort rather than seeking it. The reversal of roles brought unexpected tears to Miguel's eyes. 2 weeks before the auction, Wheeler began bringing small groups to observe their sessions, potential buyers being primed for the upcoming sale. Their presence made Thunderstorm tense, but he maintained his composure, taking his cues from Miguel's calm demeanor. "How much do you think he'll fetch?" Miguel overheard one visitor ask Wheeler. "With this remarkable recovery story, at least $1 million, possibly $2 million. Everyone loves a comeback tale, and the demonstration will cinch it." Miguel tried not to let the words affect him, focusing instead on Thunderstorm's needs. Each night, he documented the horse's progress in a journal Sarah had given him. "For whoever buys him," she'd explained, "so they'll know his triggers, his preferences, his progress." The gesture touched Miguel deeply, practical yet profoundly compassionate, like Sarah herself. One afternoon, while working in the paddock, Miguel made an impulsive decision. Without saddle or bridle, using only a light rope around Thunderstorm's neck as a symbolic guide, he approached the horse's flank and, in a fluid movement, mounted his back for the first time. The horse froze momentarily, surprised. Then, after a few tense seconds, relaxed under the familiar weight. Miguel leaned forward, whispering words of encouragement, and gently signaled for him to walk. With hesitant steps at first, then more confident ones, Thunderstorm moved around the paddock carrying Miguel. Workers stopped their tasks to watch the historic moment. Sarah, documenting the progress for medical records, couldn't suppress an emotional smile. "If that's not a miracle," she murmured to herself, "I don't know what would be." From the main house veranda, Wheeler observed with a different smile, that of a man watching profit multiply before his eyes. As the auction date approached, Miguel's anxiety increased. Thunderstorm was doing remarkably well with small groups and controlled environments, but the auction would be chaotic. Hundreds of people, unfamiliar surroundings, amplified sounds. "I'm worried about how he'll react," Miguel confessed to Sarah the evening before their departure. They sat on a fence rail, watching Thunderstorm graze peacefully in the twilight. He trusts me, but that environment could trigger all his trauma again. Sarah hesitated, then revealed something she'd never shared. My father was foreman at Wheeler's Ranch when I was a child, she said quietly. He was fired when he reported animal mistreatment. Wheeler manipulated everything to make it look like my father was stealing, destroying his reputation. He never worked with horses again. Miguel turned to her, understanding dawning. Is that why you came back to work here? To observe from the inside? Yes, she confirmed. And maybe eventually expose the truth about how he really treats his four-legged investments. The morning of the auction arrived with a crystalline October sky. Miguel woke before dawn, his few possessions packed in a duffel bag, including the journal documenting Thunderstorm's journey. Whatever happened today, he sensed his time at Bluegrass Elite was ending, one way or another. The loading of Thunderstorm into the trailer went smoothly, the horse now trusting Miguel enough to follow him into the confined space without resistance. Miguel rode in the trailer with him, softly playing guitar to keep him calm during the 40-minute journey to Keeneland. On the road, Sarah drove while explaining her plans. I've been documenting everything, Miguel. The unauthorized injections before races, the conditions in the stables no one sees, the falsified veterinary reports. Isn't that dangerous? Miguel asked, concern evident in his voice. Extremely, she admitted, but necessary. People like Wheeler only understand consequences that affect their bottom line. When they arrived at the auction pavilion, the circus-like atmosphere hit them immediately. Wheeler had extensively promoted the story of the Mexican enchanter and the killer horse. Posters displayed photos of Miguel and Thunderstorm, in moments captured without his knowledge. A crowd was already gathering to see the miraculous demonstration announced before the auction. See, you're the main attraction, said Wheeler, appearing elegantly dressed in an expensive suit. I want you to enter mounted on him. No saddle, no bridle, exactly as in rehearsals. The audience will go wild. Mr. Wheeler, there are too many people, too much noise. He's not prepared for... He will be prepared for what I say he is. Wheeler cut him off coldly. Or you've lost your job along with that miserable shack you call home, and your father won't receive the medications I so generously pay for. Understood? Miguel swallowed the response burning in his throat, nodding silently. As they prepared backstage, auction staff distributed brochures detailing Thunderstorm's impressive pedigree and past victories. A final paragraph casually mentioned, fully recovered from minor injury, ready to return to competition under proper guidance. Minor injury? Sarah was furious reading the material. He suffered severe psychological trauma. This is outright fraud. In the temporary stable, Miguel tried to calm Thunderstorm, who was already showing signs of anxiety in the strange environment. The horse snorted nervously, his ears moving in all directions, catching unfamiliar sounds. Tranquilo, mi valiente, whispered Miguel, gently massaging the animal's neck. I'll be with you the whole time. Backstage at the auction, an unusual movement began to form. Local stable workers, many Latino immigrants like Miguel, appeared in small groups. They had heard stories about the young man who spoke to traumatized horses, recognizing in him the ancient wisdom many of their fathers and grandfathers possessed. Maria Gutierrez, a 60-year-old woman who had worked in Keeneland's kitchen for 3 decades, timidly approached Miguel with a small cross made of braided straw. For protection, she explained in Spanish, handing him the charm. My grandfather made these for horses in Chihuahua. One by one, other workers approached, offering small gestures of solidarity. A colorful ribbon for luck, herbs to calm nerves when rubbed in the hands, whispered advice about handling the peculiar acoustics of the auction pavilion. Sarah watched, moved. You're not alone, Miguel. You never were. The moment of demonstration arrived like an inevitable storm. The auction announcer proclaimed with resounding voice, Ladies and gentlemen, we now present an extraordinary demonstration before Lot 157. The legendary Thunderstorm, previously valued at more than $2 million, considered unrecoverable after a tragic accident, reemerges today thanks to the remarkable work of trainer Miguel Ramirez. Miguel led Thunderstorm to the entrance of the presentation ring. The animal was already visibly trembling, his eyes wide at the hundreds of people in the stands. The noise was deafening. Applause, conversations, the amplified sound system. "I can't do this to him," Miguel murmured to Sarah, who remained at his side. "He's terrified." "Do you have a choice?" she asked, pointing to Wheeler, who watched from his privileged seat in the front row, surrounded by potential buyers. Miguel closed his eyes briefly, then whispered something in Thunderstorm's ear. With a fluid movement, he mounted the animal's back and signaled for them to advance into the illuminated circle. The first moments in the illuminated ring were tense. Thunderstorm advanced hesitantly, his steps rigid, betraying his discomfort. The crowd, however, reacted with awed gasps at the sight of the imposing animal carrying Miguel without any control equipment. The whispers rose to a collective murmur of appreciation as they completed their first circuit around the perimeter. Wheeler smiled triumphantly from his front row seat, already negotiating in hushed tones with the buyers beside him. Miguel could see his animated gestures, the greedy gleam in his eyes as he pointed out Thunderstorm's restored musculature and proud carriage. What Wheeler failed to notice, what only Miguel could feel, was the trembling beneath him, the barely contained panic in every taut muscle of Thunderstorm's body. The horse's ears swiveled frantically, trying to track too many sounds at once. His breathing came in shallow bursts. Miguel leaned forward slightly, whispering a steady stream of reassurance. "Estamos bien, mi valiente. Just a few more minutes." They had nearly completed a second circuit when disaster nearly struck. A photographer advanced abruptly to the edge of the ring, his flash firing repeatedly in quick succession. The sudden bursts of light triggered something primal in Thunderstorm's traumatized psyche, a flashback to the blinding lights and chaos of his racing accident. The horse reared violently, a high-pitched whinny of terror escaping his throat. Miguel clung to his mane, whispering words of comfort while struggling to maintain his balance. The crowd recoiled in fear, several people scrambling for the exits. Wheeler stood up, his face contorted with rage at the ruined demonstration. He signaled frantically for handlers to enter the ring, but Sarah blocked their path, insisting they would only escalate the situation. Instead of trying to control the animal by force, Miguel slid calmly from his back, positioning himself directly in front of the panicking horse. Maintaining constant eye contact, he began to sing softly, the same lullaby that always calmed Thunderstorm during storms. "Duérmete mi niño, duérmete mi sol." The familiar melody reached through the animal's terror. His frantic movements gradually slowed. His whinnies became softer, his breathing less labored. While the crowd watched in absolute silence, Thunderstorm took a hesitant step toward Miguel, then another, until finally lowering his magnificent head to gently touch the young man's chest. A collective sigh moved through the pavilion, followed by spontaneous applause. Miguel, however, ignored the reaction, focused solely on the well-being of the animal before him. "Enough," he declared firmly when Wheeler approached to continue the demonstration. "He's been through enough today." "You work for me," Wheeler hissed between clenched teeth. "Continue the demonstration or what?" Sarah's voice rang clear and strong as she joined them in the circle. "You'll fire him for protecting a valuable animal from further trauma? Or perhaps you're worried someone might discover the methods you use when cameras aren't pointed at you?" Wheeler stepped back, surprised by the public challenge. "Be careful what you're implying, Dr. Jenkins." "I'm not implying anything," she responded calmly, pulling a small device from her pocket. "I'm stating directly. I've documented everything over the past months, including the unauthorized injections before races, the conditions in stables nobody sees, the falsified veterinary reports." The blood drained from Wheeler's face. "That's defamation. You'll be sued for every penny you own." "Perhaps," Sarah conceded. "Or perhaps I'll send this evidence to the Kentucky Racing Commission today. I imagine they'd appreciate knowing how the respected Mr. Wheeler really operates." A tense silence settled between them as the crowd watched in confusion, unable to hear the discussion. Thunderstorm remained surprisingly calm beside Miguel, as if sensing his protector was fighting for him. "What do you want?" Wheeler finally asked, his voice low and defeated. "Cancel Thunderstorm's auction," Sarah immediately replied, "and sell him to me at the minimum opening price." Wheeler let out a bitter laugh. "You? A veterinarian can't afford even a tenth of his value." "I can afford the minimum price you established, $50,000, the value you yourself defined for a problem horse." Wheeler looked around, calculating the damage to his reputation if he abruptly canceled the auction versus the risk of Sarah's threats. "Done," he finally said. "But you're both fired. I want you off my ranch by tomorrow." Miguel, who had been silently observing the negotiation, finally spoke. "My father. He needs a place to stay." "The cabin at the back of my property," Sarah offered without hesitation. "It has wheelchair access and everything. It will be perfect for him." Wheeler stalked away furiously, announcing to the auctioneer that Lot 157 had been withdrawn due to an irresistible private offer. The crowd murmured in disappointment but soon dispersed for the next items in the auction. As they led Thunderstorm from the pavilion, Sarah explained her plan to Miguel. "My grandfather left me 10 acres of land near Georgetown. It's not much, but it has 2 old stables and a small house. I've been saving to someday open my own equine clinic." "And now you've spent your savings on a traumatized horse," Miguel observed, incredulous. Sarah smiled. "I invested in a partnership. You have a gift, Miguel. Together, we can create something special, a recovery center for horses others would discard." As they loaded Thunderstorm into the trailer, now officially Sarah's property, Miguel allowed himself to consider the possibility for the first time. A life built around his gift, no longer hidden in shadows, but recognized and valued. "What if it doesn't work?" he asked, the insecurity of a lifetime of marginalization weighing in his voice. Sarah looked at Thunderstorm, who watched Miguel with eyes that no longer showed fear. "Some connections are too strong to be broken," she answered simply. "We trust in that." The drive to Sarah's property took just over an hour, with Miguel riding in the trailer alongside Thunderstorm. The horse remained calm, occasionally nudging Miguel's shoulder as if seeking reassurance that they were truly together in this new chapter. "He knows something has changed," Miguel observed when they finally arrived, leading Thunderstorm down the ramp into the fading afternoon light. Sarah's property was modest but charming. Rolling hills surrounding a weathered farmhouse with peeling white paint, 2 small barns in need of repair, and ancient oak trees providing shade across the paddocks. The land had clearly been neglected for years, but its potential was evident in the rich soil and natural springs that dotted the acreage. "It's not bluegrass elite," Sarah said, watching Miguel's expression carefully. "It's better," he replied without hesitation. "It has heart." They settled Thunderstorm in the more structurally sound of the 2 barns, Miguel staying with him through that first night in the unfamiliar surroundings. The next morning, they drove back to Wheeler's property in Sarah's truck to collect their belongings, and most importantly, Miguel's father. Ramon Ramirez regarded his son with knowing eyes as Miguel explained the sudden change in their circumstances. "This horse," the older man said in Spanish. "He is the one you spoke about? The one they called dangerous?" "Yes, Papa. The one who needed someone to understand his fear." The older Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. "Your grandfather would be proud. He always said you had the gift stronger than even he did." By sunset, they had moved Miguel's father into the small but accessible cabin behind Sarah's house. His few possessions, books, photographs, a carved wooden box containing his wife's letters, fit easily into the cozy space. Miguel was struck by how little physical evidence there was of his father's 60 years of life, yet how much wisdom and dignity radiated from his weathered face. That evening, the 3 of them sat on Sarah's porch, watching Thunderstorm explore the boundaries of his new paddock with cautious curiosity. The horse would trot a short distance, then turn to locate Miguel with his eyes before venturing further. "He's checking that you're still here," Sarah observed, "making sure his safety hasn't disappeared." "I understand that feeling," Ramon commented quietly, "when everything familiar is suddenly gone." The conversation turned to practical matters. the considerable work needed to make the property functional, the limited funds they had after Sarah's investment in Thunderstorm, the uncertainty of building a business based on rehabilitating traumatized horses. Most owners want quick results, Sarah acknowledged. They can't afford months of patient work, especially with no guarantee of success. Then we educate them, Miguel suggested. Show them that some things cannot be rushed, that healing follows its own timeline. You sound like a philosopher, not a horse trainer, Sarah teased gently. Miguel smiled. My grandfather would say there's little difference. Both require observing deeply without imposing your own desires on what you see. As darkness settled over the land, Miguel walked down to check on Thunderstorm one last time. The horse nickered softly at his approach, moving to meet him at the fence line. In the moonlight, his dark coat gleamed with hints of health returning, the first visible sign of his inner healing. Mañana begins our new life, amigo, Miguel murmured, reaching up to stroke the strong neck. No more performing for others, just becoming who we truly are. Thunderstorm lowered his head, resting it briefly against Miguel's chest in what had become their ritual of connection. In that quiet moment, Miguel felt something settling within himself as well. A sense of rightness, of purpose found rather than assigned. The following weeks brought exhausting physical labor as they prepared the property for its new purpose. Sarah continued part-time veterinary work at neighboring farms to generate income, while Miguel focused on repairing fences, mucking out years of accumulated debris from the barns, and creating comfortable stalls. His father contributed by handling paperwork, his meticulous handwriting filling out permit applications and supply orders, his sharp mind keeping track of their limited budget. Each evening, the three would gather to assess progress and adjust plans, forming a family unit connected by shared purpose rather than blood. Thunderstorm thrived in the quieter environment. Each day, Miguel spent dedicated time working with him, not traditional training sessions with goals and timelines, but periods of mutual discovery. Sometimes they simply walked the property perimeter together, Miguel pointing out birds and plants, narrating their surroundings as if the horse understood every word. Other times, Miguel would bring his guitar to the paddock and play while Thunderstorm grazed nearby, occasionally lifting his head to listen before returning to the sweet grass. These peaceful moments built upon their foundation of trust, gradually erasing the trauma responses that had once defined the magnificent animal. One morning, as Miguel was repairing a section of roof on the main barn, he spotted a truck coming up the long driveway. His hand instinctively went to the hammer at his belt. They had few visitors, and Wheeler's threats still lingered in his mind. Sarah emerged from the house, shielding her eyes against the morning sun. As the truck drew closer, Miguel recognized the driver, Dr. Thornton, the retired veterinarian from Bluegrass Elite. "Don't worry," the elderly man called as he stepped from his vehicle, noting their cautious expressions. "I'm not here on Wheeler's behalf. Quite the opposite, in fact." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Dr. Thornton explained his visit. "Word's getting around about what you two are attempting here. People are curious, especially after that scene at Keeneland." "Curious or skeptical?" Sarah asked. "Both," he admitted. "But I have a proposition for you. I have a client with a mare, beautiful Arabian who's developed severe trailer anxiety after an accident. Traditional methods haven't helped. They're at their wits' end." He looked directly at Miguel. "They're willing to pay for your approach, whatever it might be. No pressure for quick results, just hope for any progress at all." Miguel exchanged glances with Sarah. Their first potential client had found them before they were even properly established. "We don't have proper facilities yet," Miguel began hesitantly. "The mare doesn't need fancy facilities," Dr. Thornton countered. "She needs someone who understands that trauma doesn't follow a convenient timeline." Later that afternoon, as Sarah reviewed their meager finances to determine what fee they might reasonably charge, Miguel sat with Thunderstorm in the paddock, considering this unexpected development. "What do you think, amigo?" he asked softly. "Are we ready to help others like you?" The horse nudged his shoulder gently, as if offering encouragement. Miguel smiled, remembering Sarah's words from the auction. "Some connections are too strong to be broken." Perhaps that truth applied not only to him and Thunderstorm, but to all who might come to this place seeking healing. As they watched from the hill overlooking the property, a warm sunset bathing the land in golden light, Miguel felt something stir in his chest, not just hope for their uncertain venture, but a deeper certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be, at the beginning of a journey that would transform not only the horses in their care, but everyone who witnessed the power of patience, respect, and unconditional presence. Miguel watched the sunset paint the Kentucky hills in gold and crimson, the dying light catching in Thunderstorm's dark coat as the horse grazed peacefully in his paddock. Tomorrow would bring Bella Luna, the traumatized Arabian mare Dr. Thornton had told them about, their first official client. The realization filled him with equal parts excitement and trepidation. "Ready for tomorrow?" Sarah asked, joining him at the fence line, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. Miguel accepted the offered coffee. "I'm not sure you can ever be ready to meet someone else's pain. You can only be present for it." The following morning dawned clear and crisp, the first hints of frost glittering on the grass. Miguel and Sarah had been awake since before dawn, making final preparations to the small paddock they designated for Bella Luna. Checking fence stability, removing any potentially frightening objects, creating a space that offered both security and freedom of movement. Roberto Ramirez watched from his wheelchair on the cabin's small porch, a clipboard balanced on his lap. Though limited physically, he had embraced his role as the center's record keeper with enthusiasm, creating meticulous systems for tracking each animal's progress. "Nunca pensé que estaría construyendo algo mío," Miguel said, joining his father briefly for a moment of quiet reflection before their visitors arrived. "I never thought I'd be building something of my own." Roberto's weathered face creased in a smile. "Tu madre siempre lo supo. She always knew. She would say you had las manos que hablan con los animales, the hands that speak with animals." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their moment. A gleaming black SUV pulled into the drive, followed by a modern horse trailer, equipment worth more than everything on their modest property combined. Sarah straightened her jacket, suddenly conscious of her worn jeans and the peeling paint on the nearest fence post. "Here we go," she murmured. Richard Thornton emerged from the SUV, his tailored casual wear and manicured appearance marking him as distinctly out of place in their rustic setting. His handshake was firm, his smile professional but reserved as he surveyed the property. "It's quaint," he offered, clearly searching for a polite description. "It's a work in progress," Sarah replied evenly. "We prioritize creating a calm environment over aesthetics." Thornton nodded, though his expression suggested skepticism. "My Bella Luna has been seen by 3 behaviorists and 2 veterinary specialists. None could resolve her panic attacks. She hasn't entered a trailer since the flooding incident 6 months ago, which makes competition impossible." "We're not going to force her into a trailer," Miguel said quietly, approaching the back of Thornton's gleaming transport. "That's not how we work." Through the trailer's window, he could see the mare, a delicate dapple gray with flared nostrils and wide, terrified eyes. Her coat was darkened with sweat despite the cool morning, and her sides heaved with rapid breathing. "How did you get her in there today?" Sarah asked, frowning at the obvious distress signals. Thornton shifted uncomfortably. "Sedation. It's the only way." Miguel exchanged a glance with Sarah. Already they were glimpsing the fundamental disconnect between their approach and conventional methods. "Mr. Thornton," Miguel began carefully, "when you brought her here, what exactly were you hoping for?" "To fix her, obviously," Thornton replied with a hint of impatience. "I need her competition ready by spring." "We don't fix horses, Mr. Thornton," Miguel explained, his voice gentle but firm. "We help in healing, which comes from the animal itself, in its own time." "How long?" asked Thornton bluntly. "As long as necessary," Sarah replied, establishing the tone of how they would operate. "If that doesn't work for you, we completely understand." A tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of Bella Luna's frightened movement inside the trailer. Thornton looked from Sarah to Miguel, then back to his expensive trailer. My daughter loves this horse, he finally admitted, his professional veneer cracking slightly. She's at college now, but this mare is her heart. Competition deadlines aside. I just want Bella to be okay again. Miguel nodded, recognizing the genuine concern beneath the man's brusque exterior. Then let's start by helping her out of that trailer in a way that doesn't add to her trauma. The next hour unfolded with methodical patience. Instead of rushing to unload the panicking mare, Miguel simply opened the trailer doors and sat on the ground nearby, quietly playing his guitar. Sarah led Thornton away to handle paperwork, understanding intuitively that the businessman's nervous energy would only heighten the horse's anxiety. From his position on the ground, Miguel observed Bella Luna carefully. Her ears flicked back and forth, tracking the unfamiliar music. Her breathing, though still rapid, began to find a rhythm that matched the gentle melody. When Miguel occasionally paused playing, the silence served as its own form of communication, a space where pressure was completely absent. After 40 minutes, Bella Luna took her first tentative step toward the trailer's exit. Miguel continued playing, his eyes lowered, offering no expectation or demand. 20 minutes later, the mare stood fully outside the trailer, trembling but present in the open air. "We'll take it from here," Sarah told Thornton, who had been watching from a distance with poorly concealed impatience. "We'll call with updates every few days." After Thornton reluctantly departed, Sarah joined Miguel near the mare. "What do you see?" she asked softly. Miguel studied Bella Luna's body language, the constant shifting of weight, the twitching skin, the way her gaze darted to the trailer every few seconds. "She's waiting for the next trauma," he answered. "For her, every human interaction has become associated with force." That night, Miguel slept in the small tack room adjacent to Bella Luna's stall. He didn't approach her directly, didn't attempt to touch or halter her. He simply existed in her space, reading aloud from a worn copy of Love in the Time of Cholera, the Spanish words flowing melodically into the darkness. Over the following days, their routine took shape. Miguel would spend hours simply sitting near Bella Luna, sometimes playing music, sometimes reading, sometimes in complete silence. He placed food and water where she could access it without approaching him, then retreated to give her space to choose. Sarah watched this process with professional fascination, taking detailed notes for their records. "Most trainers would have used sedatives by now," she commented on the third morning. "Ropes, restraints, pressure, anything to establish control quickly." "Look at her eyes," Miguel replied, nodding toward the mare who stood watchfully at the far end of her paddock. "What do you see?" Sarah studied the animal thoughtfully. "Caution, fear still, but maybe a question." "She's been controlled enough," Miguel said simply. "Forced, pushed, handled. Now she needs to remember she has choices." Word of their unorthodox methods began to spread through the local equestrian community. First came curious neighbors, stopping by with housewarming gifts that inevitably led to questions about that traumatized Arabian. Then came students from the nearby equine program at the university, offering volunteer hours in exchange for the chance to observe Miguel's techniques. One rainy afternoon, a pickup truck with 3 weather-beaten men arrived unannounced. They introduced themselves as trainers from neighboring farms, their skepticism evident in their crossed arms and dubious expressions. "Heard you're using some kind of Mexican horse magic," said the oldest, a man named Jim with deep creases around eyes that had squinted into the sun for decades. Miguel might once have bristled at the casual stereotyping, but now he simply smiled. "Nothing magical about patience and respect, sir. Would you like to observe?" The men stayed for 2 hours, watching in silence as Miguel sat reading in Bella Luna's presence, the mare gradually grazing her way closer to him. Each approach her own choice, each retreat honored without frustration. When they finally left, Jim shook Miguel's hand with newfound respect. "Been breaking horses for 40 years, he admitted. "Never thought of just waiting for them to come around on their own." "Breaking," Miguel repeated softly. "That word says much about our traditional approach, doesn't it?" As autumn deepened toward winter, progress with Bella Luna came in small, precious increments. The first time she accepted an apple from Miguel's outstretched hand. The first time she allowed him to stand beside her without stepping away. Each tiny victory was meticulously documented in Roberto's logbooks, creating a record of healing that unfolded not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in moments of quiet choice. "You understand that's not how most people measure success with horses," Sarah pointed out one evening as they reviewed the day's observations. "For most owners, it's about performance benchmarks, jumping higher, running faster, obeying commands more precisely. Then we must help them see differently," Miguel replied. "Show them that true partnership begins with trust, not compliance." Their second client arrived unexpectedly, a phone call from a desperate owner whose show jumper had developed a terror of water jumps after a bad fall. Then came a third, an off-track thoroughbred whose racing trauma had left him unable to tolerate being touched on his left side. With each new arrival, Miguel and Sarah refined their approach, learning to articulate their philosophy more clearly to owners accustomed to quick fixes and linear progress. "We understand your frustration," Sarah would explain patiently, "but trauma doesn't heal on a convenient schedule." One frosty December morning, Miguel arrived at Bella Luna's paddock to find her waiting at the gate, a first in their nearly 2 months together. When he entered with her breakfast, instead of retreating to a safe distance, she remained nearby, her ears pricked forward in cautious interest. Hardly daring to breathe, Miguel slowly extended his hand, palm up. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, with delicate precision, Bella Luna stretched her neck forward and rested her muzzle briefly in his open hand, their first voluntary physical connection. That afternoon, when Thornton called for his weekly update, the genuine emotion in Miguel's voice as he described the breakthrough left the businessman unusually quiet. "My daughter's coming home for Christmas," Thornton finally said. "Would it be possible for her to visit Bella Luna, just to see her, not to interact or anything?" "Of course," Miguel agreed. "By then, who knows how much more progress we might see." As the year's first snow dusted the Kentucky hills, their small operation grew in unexpected ways. The trickle of curious visitors became a steady stream. Local feed stores began offering discounts on supplies. An elderly woman from the neighboring farm appeared one morning with hand-knitted blankets for those poor, traumatized creatures. The most significant surprise came when an envelope arrived, bearing the letterhead of a prestigious equine journal. Inside was a request to interview Miguel about his revolutionary approach to equine trauma rehabilitation. "They want to publish an article about us," Sarah said, her voice reflecting amazement. "About our methods." "About the horses," Miguel corrected gently. "Their journey is what matters." That evening, as they walked the property perimeter checking fences before nightfall, Sarah paused beside the newly erected sign at their driveway entrance, Thunder's Hope Equine Recovery Center, carved in wood by a local artisan who had refused payment, saying only that good work deserves recognition. "We've come so far in such a short time," she marveled. Miguel nodded, watching as Thunderstorm and Bella Luna grazed peacefully in adjacent paddocks, occasionally lifting their heads to acknowledge each other. Two souls finding their way back from darkness. And yet, he reflected, we've only just begun. On a particularly cold Friday in January, the unexpected happened. Wheeler's distinctive Maserati appeared at their gates, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits and serious expressions. "Lawyers," Sarah muttered upon spotting the visitors from the office window. "I knew he would eventually try something." Sarah gripped the edge of the desk, watching through the window as Wheeler's Maserati crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway. The winter sun glinted off the polished hood, making the car seem even more out of place against the weathered buildings of Thunder's Hope. Miguel, who had just returned from his morning ride with Thunderstorm, dismounted calmly and handed the horse to one of the young volunteers before joining Sarah at the doorway. "Let me handle this," Sarah whispered, squaring her shoulders. Miguel nodded, his face composed despite the sudden appearance of the man who had once wielded complete power over their lives. As they stepped onto the porch to greet the unwelcome visitors, Miguel noticed how Wheeler seemed diminished somehow, his expensive coat hanging slightly looser, new lines etched around his eyes. The months since their confrontation at Keeneland had clearly taken their toll on the proud breeder. "Mr. Wheeler," Sarah greeted formally, her voice carrying across the yard. "How can we help you?" Wheeler removed his leather gloves deliberately, the two suited men flanking him like sentries. "I've come to see the horse," he replied curtly. "My attorneys believe we have grounds to contest the sale. Coercion and extortion are terms they've mentioned." Miguel felt his muscles tense, but Sarah remained impressively calm. "Of course you can see him. In fact, you've arrived at an excellent time." Miguel just returned from a morning ride with him. Despite the implied threat hanging in the air, Sarah led their small procession through the property with the confidence of a woman on her own land. Miguel watched Wheeler's eyes cataloging everything: the repaired fences, the fresh paint on the barn doors, the small but functional veterinary lab they'd established in what had once been a storage shed. "We've been fortunate to have wonderful community support," Sarah explained, noting Wheeler's surprise at their progress. "Students from the university volunteer their time. Local ranchers donated materials." Wheeler's attorneys exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. Their client had described a ramshackle operation run by desperate former employees, not this modest but clearly growing enterprise with obvious local backing. As they approached the main paddock, Thunderstorm grazed peacefully, free from any restraints, apparently indifferent to the visitors. The transformation from the terrified, aggressive animal Wheeler had last seen was striking. His coat gleamed with health, his posture relaxed yet alert, his eyes clear and calm. "Would you like to see him closer?" Miguel offered unexpectedly. Wheeler hesitated visibly. His last encounter with the animal had not ended well, a memory that clearly still unsettled him. "He's not the same horse you knew," Miguel assured him quietly. "Nor am I the same man." With a reluctant nod, Wheeler opened the gate and entered the paddock, followed at a distance by his visibly uncomfortable attorneys, whose polished city shoes were already suffering from the rural terrain. Thunderstorm raised his head at the intrusion, ears moving alertly as he assessed the newcomers. A moment of tension hung in the air as the horse fixed his gaze on Wheeler, clearly recognizing him. "He remembers you," Miguel commented calmly. "Obviously," Wheeler replied nervously, "and probably not good memories." "Horses don't hold grudges like we do," Miguel explained, approaching the animal and whispering something in his ear. "They live in the present. What matters is how you approach him now." With a gentle gesture, Miguel indicated that Wheeler could come closer. The older man took a few hesitant steps. "No sudden movements," Miguel instructed. "Breathe normally. Let him feel your energy." To everyone's surprise, especially Wheeler's, Thunderstorm remained calm, observing his former owner with cautious curiosity, but without fear or aggression. The horse's ears remained forward, his breathing steady, a stark contrast to the panicked animal who once demolished stall doors at the mere sound of Wheeler's voice. "This is remarkable," Wheeler admitted, genuinely impressed. "He was impossible to approach when he was treated like a product with an expiration date," Sarah completed, without hostility, simply stating a fact. Wheeler didn't immediately respond. Instead, he observed how Miguel interacted with the animal, the silent communication between them, the evident trust in the way Thunderstorm responded to the subtlest of gestures. Miguel needed only to shift his weight slightly, and the massive horse would adjust his position accordingly, maintaining perfect alignment with his human partner without any visible cues. "What you've done is extraordinary," Wheeler finally admitted. "I never believed he could recover like this." Miguel offered a discreet smile. "We didn't do anything extraordinary. We simply gave him time, respect, and a safe environment to heal his wounds, both visible and invisible." One of the attorneys cleared his throat impatiently. "Mr. Wheeler, we need to discuss the legal matter we came for." Wheeler raised his hand, silencing him. "There will be no legal matter. The sale was legitimate." The attorneys exchanged confused glances, but Wheeler had already made his decision. Turning to Sarah and Miguel, he spoke with surprising sincerity. "I came here to recover a valuable investment. Instead, I found a valuable lesson." He paused, visibly uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "What you've built here is something money can't buy." As Wheeler and his attorneys walked back toward the Maserati, Sarah and Miguel remained in the paddock, processing what had happened. Thunderstorm drifted back to grazing nearby, untroubled by the emotional currents swirling among the humans. "Do you think he's genuinely changed?" Sarah asked skeptically. Miguel watched Thunderstorm, who had returned calmly to his grazing. "People are like traumatized horses sometimes. We build walls to protect ourselves. Some are harder to tear down than others." The winter landscape surrounding Thunder's Hope seemed to hold its breath in the days following Wheeler's unexpected visit. Miguel and Sarah remained cautiously optimistic, but prepared for potential legal challenges despite Wheeler's apparent change of heart. When the certified letter arrived bearing the letterhead of Wheeler's law firm, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "Oh my God," she whispered, scanning the contents. "Miguel, come look at this." Instead of a summons or cease and desist order, the envelope contained donation documents. Wheeler was offering substantial funding to expand Thunder's Hope, with no conditions beyond a modest plaque acknowledging his contribution. "Why?" Sarah asked suspiciously when she called Wheeler to verify the legitimacy of the offer. "Let's say I'm investing in something more lasting than trophies," he replied simply. "Besides, my 7-year-old granddaughter hasn't stopped talking about the man who whispers with horses since she read about you in the newspaper. Apparently, she wants to be a veterinarian now." The transformation of Thunder's Hope accelerated with Wheeler's unexpected support. By early spring, new stables had risen where dilapidated sheds once stood. A properly equipped veterinary clinic replaced their makeshift examination area. Simple but comfortable lodging for students and volunteers took shape near the east pasture. Most significant was the change in their reputation within the equestrian community. Wheeler's endorsement, however reluctant initially, opened doors previously closed to them. Prestigious breeding operations began discreetly sending their problem cases to Miguel, horses whose issues defied conventional methods and threatened significant financial losses. On a particularly glorious April morning, Thunder's Hope welcomed special visitors, a group of children with special needs from a local school. Miguel watched with contained emotion as Thunderstorm, now perfectly at ease with strangers, gently allowed small hands to caress his sleek neck and powerful shoulders. "He loves children," Miguel commented to Sarah, who documented the moment for the center's website. "It's as if he knows they are pure of heart." Sarah smiled, capturing with her camera the moment when a girl in a wheelchair laughed delightedly as Thunderstorm deliberately lowered his head to her level, his soft muzzle blowing warm breath on her outstretched palm. "You know what's most amazing?" she reflected. "Not only did we help him heal, he's helping others heal too." A 12-year-old boy named Marcus, who hadn't spoken since witnessing a violent crime the previous year, stood transfixed before Thunderstorm. The horse regarded the child with an almost uncanny intensity, then slowly, deliberately extended his neck until his forehead rested against the boy's chest. "He's hugging him," whispered an aide in astonishment. "I've never seen Marcus allow physical contact like that." Miguel nodded, recognizing the mysterious alchemy that sometimes occurred between wounded souls. Thunderstorm recognizes pain in others, especially when it has no words. That evening, after the visitors had departed, Miguel and Sarah walked the perimeter of their expanded property. The setting sun gilded the new fences and buildings, transforming the modest rehabilitation center into something that seemed almost magical in the golden light. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward the paddocks where 6 horses now resided, each with their own story of trauma, each making their way back to trust at their own pace. "Not even in dreams," Miguel admitted. "My only goal was to save one horse who reminded me of myself." When they reached the highest point on the property, they paused to watch Thunderstorm moving freely in the large pasture below, his black coat gleaming like polished obsidian against the green grass. Occasionally he would approach one of the newer horses, a skittish mare who had arrived the previous week, standing quietly beside her as if offering silent companionship in her adjustment. "We're seeing something remarkable," Sarah observed. "He's not just recovered, he's become a healer himself." Miguel nodded, remembering the terrified animal who had once destroyed stalls and attacked handlers. Perhaps that's the true measure of healing, when we can help others despite our own scars. As twilight deepened into dusk, they made their way back toward the main house, where Roberto waited on the porch with fresh coffee and his meticulous logbooks. The daily ritual of reviewing each animal's progress had become a cherished time for all three of them, a chance to celebrate small victories and strategize through setbacks. "Wheeler called again," Roberto mentioned as they settled into their usual chairs. "His granddaughter's school wants to arrange a field trip. Apparently she's told all her classmates about the magic horse place." Sarah laughed softly. From enemy to promoter in less than 6 months. Who would have thought? Miguel gazed toward the paddocks, where the shadowy forms of their equine residents moved peacefully in the gathering darkness. "Healing changes everyone it touches," he replied. "Even those who initially resist it most." Weeks later, an envelope arrived from Wheeler's office containing not only his next donation installment, but photographs of his granddaughter proudly wearing a Thunder's Hope t-shirt at her school science fair. Her project, The Science of Horse Whispers, had won first place. The splash of vibrant colors from Wheeler's donation transformed Thunder's hope with the arrival of spring. Fresh white paint gleamed on the new stables, green metal roofs reflected the Kentucky sun, and flower beds burst with carefully tended blooms along the pathways. Miguel paused his morning chores to appreciate the physical manifestation of their evolution, from a desperate gamble to a functioning sanctuary in just a few months. "The architect called," Sarah announced, joining him with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "The indoor arena plans are finalized. Construction starts next week." Miguel accepted the offered coffee, inhaling its rich aroma. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real." "It's real because it works," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the main paddock where Thunderstorm moved with elegant grace alongside a recently arrived thoroughbred still learning to trust humans again. "People are beginning to notice." Indeed, Thunder's Hope had become something of a local phenomenon. Their waiting list had grown to 15 horses, with inquiries coming from as far as California and New York. The staff had expanded too: 2 part-time veterinary assistants, a barn manager, and a rotating group of university students eager to learn Miguel's methods. That afternoon, a battered pickup truck arrived carrying a special visitor, the director of a nearby veterans rehabilitation center. James Collins, a former Army sergeant with rigid posture and vigilant eyes, explained his interest without preamble. "We have a veteran who isn't responding to conventional therapies," he stated, studying the property with professional assessment. "Jake served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Came back physically intact, but..." He tapped his temple significantly. "He's unreachable most days." "And you think horses might help?" Sarah asked. Collins shrugged. "Conventional treatments aren't working. His therapist heard about what you're doing here. It seemed worth a try." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to meet him, but he should understand something first." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The horses are like mirrors of our soul. They react not to what we say, but to what we feel." "That's exactly what Jake needs," Collins replied. "Someone who can see past his defenses." 2 days later, Jake Wilson arrived, a man in his early 30s with haunted eyes and movements so controlled they seemed mechanical. He stood at the property entrance, scanning sightlines and exit routes with the hypervigilance of someone who never truly believed in safety. Instead of the expected introductions and tour, Miguel simply handed Jake a brush. "Thunderstorm needs grooming. I'll show you how he likes it." The directness seemed to surprise Jake, breaking through his practiced blankness. In the presence of the massive black horse, Jake's military rigidity gradually softened. Thunderstorm, displaying an almost uncanny sensitivity, remained unusually still as the veteran's trembling hands moved across his coat. "He's completely calm with you," Miguel observed after 20 minutes of silence. "That's rare with new people." Jake spoke for the first time, his voice rough from disuse. "He's assessing me." "Yes," Miguel agreed. "And what do you think he sees?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, but not dismissed. When Jake left that afternoon, he asked quietly if he could return the following day. "The horses are always here," Miguel replied simply. Jake's visits became regular, 3 times weekly at first, then daily. He rarely spoke, but his body language transformed in the presence of the horses, particularly Thunderstorm. The vigilant scanning diminished. His breathing deepened. His movements became fluid rather than calculated. Collins observed the changes with cautious optimism. "Whatever you're doing, it's reaching him when nothing else could." "I'm not doing anything," Miguel corrected gently. "Thunderstorm is. Jake feels safe with him because the horse makes no demands, holds no expectations, passes no judgments." While Thunder's Hope expanded its work with veterans, another significant development arrived in the form of a small girl with solemn eyes. Lily Martinez, age 10, had not spoken a word since the car accident that claimed her parents 8 months earlier. Her aunt, now her guardian, brought her on the recommendation of a child psychologist who had heard about the center's work. "The doctors say she's physically capable of speech," Elena Martinez explained, watching her niece from a distance as Sarah introduced her to the miniature therapy pony they'd recently acquired. "She just chooses not to." Miguel nodded, recognizing in the child's blank expression the same defensive withdrawal he'd seen in traumatized horses. Sometimes silence is the only safe place when the world becomes too painful. Unlike the structured therapeutic approach they'd used with veterans, Miguel suggested something different for Lily. Let her simply be here. No pressure, no expectations, no scheduled activities. Let her discover her own connections. Elena agreed, though skepticism shadowed her tired eyes. For 3 visits, Lily wandered the property silently, observing the horses from a distance, never approaching or engaging. On the 4th visit, something unexpected happened. Thunderstorm, grazing in the far paddock, lifted his head when Lily passed by. The massive horse walked deliberately to the fence line where the small girl stood, lowering his impressive head to her level. Miguel, watching from the barn doorway, held his breath. Thunderstorm had never approached a visitor unprompted before. For long minutes, girl and horse regarded each other in perfect stillness. Then, with heartbreaking gentleness, Lily raised her hand and touched the white star on Thunderstorm's forehead, her first voluntary connection with any living being since the accident. "Look at that," Sarah whispered, joining Miguel in the doorway. "It's like he recognizes something in her." "Pain recognizes pain," Miguel replied softly. "And perhaps hope recognizes hope." Lily's visits became the highlight of everyone's week. Though still silent, she began to express herself through small, significant gestures, bringing carrots for Thunderstorm, drawing pictures of the horses, sitting for hours beside the paddock fence with a book open on her lap. After her 6th visit, the breakthrough happened. Elena arrived to collect Lily and found her niece with her arms wrapped around Thunderstorm's neck, her face pressed against his sleek coat, whispering something no one else could hear. "She's talking to him," Elena gasped, tears streaming down her face. Those are the first words she's spoken in 8 months. The center's growing success attracted media attention. A local newspaper ran a feature on their work with veterans and children, complete with photographs of Thunderstorm gently interacting with Lily. The article led to a call from a regional television station requesting an interview. Miguel's initial reaction was reluctance. "I don't want to become a spectacle," he told Sarah as they discussed the request that evening. "What we do here is private, personal." "But other people need to know there's hope," Sarah countered gently. "Think of all the horses being discarded because conventional methods fail them. Think of people like Jake and Lily who might never find their way here otherwise." The following week, Miguel found himself facing cameras for the first time, uncomfortable under the bright lights but passionate when explaining their philosophy. "Horses don't need to be broken," he stated, his voice gaining strength as he spoke about the work he loved. They need to be understood. Most problem behaviors begin as fear responses. When we address the fear rather than suppressing the behavior, true partnership becomes possible. The resulting segment aired on the evening news, presenting Thunder's Hope not as a curiosity, but as a legitimate alternative approach to both equine rehabilitation and human healing. Donations increased. Volunteers appeared. A neighboring farmer offered use of his additional acreage for their expanding herd. With recognition came new challenges. A traditional training facility nearby criticized their methods publicly as unscientific coddling. Certain veterinarians questioned the lack of structured timelines for rehabilitation. Miguel accepted these criticisms with characteristic calm. "Results speak for themselves," he told a concerned board member. "Our horses recover, our people heal. The path may look different, but the destination is the same." One particularly meaningful afternoon, Miguel sat on the paddock fence, watching Thunderstorm interact with Lily, who now visited 3 times weekly. The girl still spoke only to the horses, but those whispered conversations grew longer each visit. Today, she had brought a book and was reading aloud to Thunderstorm, her small voice gaining strength with each page. Sarah joined Miguel on the fence, her shoulder brushing his as they observed the touching scene. "Sometimes I think he understands human pain better than many humans do," she commented. "He's lived it," Miguel replied. "Fear, confusion, betrayal. He's experienced them all. Perhaps that creates a special kind of empathy." As Lily continued reading, Thunderstorm maintained perfect attention, his ears focused on her voice, his body completely still except for the occasional gentle nuzzle of her shoulder when she paused between pages. The connection between them transcended species, creating a space where healing flowed in both directions. "Do you know what she's reading to him?" Sarah asked. Miguel smiled. "Black Beauty. Her aunt says it's the first book she's shown interest in since the accident." The sun was beginning to set, painting the Kentucky hills in shades of gold and amber. In this magical light, the modest buildings of Thunder's Hope took on an almost ethereal quality, a sanctuary not just of physical structures but of hope made tangible. "She'll speak to humans again when she's ready," Miguel observed, "just like Thunderstorm eventually learned to trust again. Some journeys can't be rushed." As twilight deepened across the paddocks, neither Miguel nor Sarah noticed the black sedan that had pulled up at the property entrance. Nor did they see the distinguished older man who stood watching the scene through expensive binoculars, his assistant beside him taking detailed notes. "That's him?" asked the man, focusing on Miguel. "The one they call the Horse Whisperer?" "Yes, sir," replied his companion. "Miguel Ramirez, former stable hand, no formal training. The horse with the child is Thunderstorm, previously considered irrecoverable after racing trauma." "Fascinating," murmured the man, adjusting his binoculars to observe more closely. "And you say the Federation is sending representatives next week?" "Yes, sir. They're considering featuring his methods at the National Symposium." The man lowered his binoculars, a thoughtful expression crossing his distinguished features. "Make sure we're here for that visit. I want to see exactly what makes this approach so special." He glanced once more at the peaceful scene, the massive black horse listening attentively to the small girl reading to him, the 2 humans watching from the fence line, all bathed in the golden light of sunset. "There's something happening here that goes beyond conventional training. I want to understand it." The black sedan pulled away from Thunder's Hope as silently as it had arrived, leaving Miguel and Sarah unaware of the scrutiny they'd been under. The unexpected attention their center had begun attracting brought both opportunities and complications that neither had anticipated when they first rescued Thunderstorm. "Something's arrived for you," Roberto called from the main house porch the following morning, waving a thick envelope with an impressive gold-embossed logo. Miguel wiped his hands on his jeans as he approached, recognizing the seal of Equestrian Worldwide, one of the largest entertainment conglomerates specializing in horse shows, merchandise, and media productions. "What do they want with us?" he wondered aloud, breaking the seal. Inside, an elaborate proposal outlined in corporate language what amounted to a commercial takeover of Thunderstorm's story. Equestrian Worldwide wanted exclusive rights to transform the Mexican Horse Whisperer and his Miracle Horse into books, documentary films, children's merchandise, and even a possible feature film. This is... Miguel trailed off, overwhelmed by the pages of potential licensing agreements. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the documents over his shoulder. "Look at the advance figure they're offering," she whispered, pointing to a number that exceeded their annual operating budget by several times. By afternoon, the matter had grown more complicated with the arrival of 3 executives in tailored suits and polished manners. They sat in Thunderhope's modest office, looking oddly out of place among the hand-built furniture and cork bulletin boards covered with horse rehabilitation schedules. "What we're proposing," explained Diane Forrester, the sleek marketing director, "is a comprehensive partnership that would secure Thunder's hope financially for years to come." She gestured toward the window where several horses grazed peacefully. "Your work is inspirational, and we believe people around the world would respond to it. With the right packaging, of course," added Martin Wells, adjusting his designer glasses. "We envision a book series, merchandise, perhaps educational programs." Miguel remained silent, studying the contract they'd placed before him. The advance figure alone could fund a significant expansion, pay for his father's increasingly expensive medical treatments, and secure their operating costs for years. "We should discuss this privately," Sarah interjected, noting Miguel's discomfort. After the executives departed with promises to return the following week, Sarah's excitement bubbled over. "Do you realize what this means? We could expand, accept more horses, never worry about your father's medical bills again." Miguel paced the small office, uncharacteristically agitated. "They want to turn what we do into entertainment, Sarah. They used phrases like capitalize on the emotional appeal and marketable narrative arc. This isn't about entertainment." "Maybe not for you," Sarah countered gently. "But if their books and films help spread these methods to people who would never find us otherwise, isn't that worth considering?" Their debate was interrupted by an email alert on Sarah's computer. Her expression darkened as she read the screen. The Kentucky Breeders' Association has published an article criticizing unscientific methods based on superstition and folklore in equine rehabilitation. Though they weren't mentioned by name, the references to untrained individuals using Spanish lullabies instead of proven behavioral modification techniques made the target clear enough. The following morning brought further complications when Miguel discovered an interview on the local radio station with Eduardo Garcia, president of the Breeders' Association. "Methods like those employed by Mr. Ramirez may actually delay proper recovery of valuable animals," Garcia claimed with professional authority. "These techniques lack peer-reviewed validation and rely heavily on emotional anthropomorphism rather than established equine science. They're trying to discredit us before we've even had a chance to properly document our results," Sarah fumed, turning off the radio. Miguel's response was characteristically measured. "They fear what they don't understand. We'll answer with results, not arguments." Those results, however, were about to be tested by their most challenging case yet. That afternoon, a gleaming horse trailer arrived bearing what appeared to be a ghost, a stunning Arabian stallion with a coat so white it seemed luminescent, even in the gray light of the overcast day. "His name is Phantom," explained the handler, a nervous young woman who maintained a significant distance from the trailer. "Owner paid me double to deliver him because nobody else would take the job." The reason for her caution became immediately apparent. Phantom refused to exit the trailer, trembling violently at the mere sound of human voices. When Miguel approached slowly, the horse's panic escalated to dangerous levels, his powerful body slamming against the trailer walls with enough force to rock the vehicle. "I've never seen fear this profound," Sarah murmured, observing from a safe distance. For 3 days, Miguel attempted his usual approach, sitting quietly near the trailer, which they'd positioned inside a small paddock, playing guitar, reading aloud in his gentle mixture of English and Spanish. Nothing penetrated Phantom's terror. The stallion remained inside the trailer, accepting food and water only when left completely alone. His papers say he was a champion show horse, Sarah noted, reviewing the limited documentation that had accompanied Phantom. Multiple blue ribbons in dressage. Then suddenly, nothing. No show records for the past year. By the end of the first week, doubt began to creep into Miguel's thoughts. Each of his previous successes had shown at least minimal response to his patient approach by this point. Phantom, however, remained as unreachable as on day one, his magnificent white coat dulled by stress and his eyes perpetually wild with fear. "Maybe they're right," Miguel confessed to Sarah one evening after another fruitless session. "Maybe I am just an amateur who got lucky with Thunderstorm." Sarah's response was immediate and firm. "That's nonsense. Every horse is different, every trauma unique. Thunderstorm took weeks to trust you, remember?" Nevertheless, doubt had taken root. That night, unable to sleep, Miguel pored over the limited information they had about Phantom, searching for any clue that might help breach the animal's defenses. Something about the ownership paperwork nagged at him, a familiar name buried in the transfer documents. Eduardo Garcia, he realized with a start. Phantom belonged to Garcia. Sarah's investigative skills quickly confirmed Miguel's suspicion. Phantom had indeed been one of Garcia's prize show horses, until a mysterious gap in his competition record began approximately 14 months earlier. Additional digging revealed veterinary evaluations declaring the horse psychologically unsuitable for continued competition and resistant to standard behavioral modification. He abandoned Phantom as irrecoverable, Miguel realized, and now uses our work with him against us. Armed with this knowledge, Miguel and Sarah attended a public forum on equine welfare where Garcia was scheduled to speak. The conference room fell silent when they entered, Garcia's presentation on scientific methods in equine rehabilitation faltering momentarily. During the question period, Sarah stood. "Dr. Garcia, could you explain why you declared your former horse Phantom irrecoverable after traditional methods failed, then criticized alternative approaches when owners seek them as a last resort?" Garcia's composure slipped momentarily. "That case was entirely different," he countered, recovering quickly. "And the documentation you're referring to was confidential veterinary assessment." "The question stands," Miguel interjected, rising beside Sarah. "You abandoned Phantom as irrecoverable, and now use our work with him to discredit methods you haven't bothered to investigate." Garcia's response was measured but defensive. "Traditional methods work for 99% of horses. Why should we change everything because of a few problematic animals?" "Because each life matters," Miguel replied simply. "Even the difficult ones, especially the difficult ones." The confrontation left a sour taste, but it also crystallized something important for Miguel. That evening he returned to basics with Phantom. No expectations, no techniques, just presence. He sat quietly outside the trailer where the horse remained barricaded, not playing music or reading, simply existing in the same space. "I don't need to prove anything to Garcia or anyone else," he realized. This was never about validation or recognition. For 3 nights, he maintained this vigil, sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer, until exhaustion drove him home. On the 4th night, bone-tired after a day of physical labor repairing fences, Miguel inadvertently fell asleep against the paddock fence near Phantom's trailer. He awoke at dawn to an extraordinary sight. Phantom stood outside the trailer, barely 3 feet away, observing him with cautious curiosity rather than blind panic. When Miguel slowly extended his hand, not to touch, but simply to offer his presence, the stallion held his ground instead of retreating. It was the smallest of victories, but it rekindled Miguel's confidence. Every horse has its own timeline, he reminded himself. Every healing follows its own path. That afternoon, Sarah found him reviewing the equestrian worldwide contract again. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "Trying to find balance," he admitted, "between protecting what makes this place special and reaching more animals who need help." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unfamiliar vehicle, a modest rental car rather than the luxury sedans they'd grown accustomed to seeing from potential donors and media representatives. A young Asian American woman emerged, camera bag slung over one shoulder, notebook in hand. Her casual attire and practical boots suggested someone comfortable around horses. "I'm Rebecca Chen from National Geographic," she introduced herself. "I'm here for an in-depth report on alternative methods of equine recovery. Not interested in sensationalist stories, but in the science behind what you do." As Rebecca outlined her proposal, a month-long immersion to document their methods rigorously, Miguel and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances. Here was a third option they hadn't considered. Neither commercialization nor defensive posturing, but objective documentation that might bridge the gap between traditional practices and their intuitive approach. "I should warn you," Miguel said with a small smile. "Our most challenging case just arrived. I can't guarantee breakthrough moments for your cameras." Rebecca's response surprised him. "I'm not looking for dramatic breakthroughs or heartwarming moments. I'm interested in the day-to-day reality of your work, the patience, the setbacks, the small victories that might go unnoticed by untrained eyes." For the first time since the commercial offer had arrived, Miguel felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Perhaps they didn't need to choose between commercialization and obscurity. Perhaps there was a middle path, one that honored both the intuitive wisdom of his grandfather's traditions and the scientific validation the equestrian world demanded. As sunset painted the hills in amber light, the three walked toward Phantom's paddock, where the white stallion now stood at the farthest corner, watching their approach with vigilant attention rather than blind panic. The smallest sign of progress, invisible to most, but clear as daylight to Miguel's experienced eyes. Rebecca Chen arrived at Thunder's Hope just as the first light of dawn broke over the Kentucky hills, her camera already in hand to capture the early morning routine. Miguel found her kneeling by the fence line, photographing the interplay of mist and sunlight across the paddocks. "You start early," he observed, offering her a thermos of coffee. Rebecca accepted gratefully. The best stories reveal themselves when no one's performing for the camera. Her directness was refreshing after weeks of dealing with corporate executives and skeptical traditionalists. Over the next few days, Rebecca became a quiet, constant presence at the center. Unlike previous media visitors who demanded demonstrations or posed questions that expected specific answers, she simply observed, following Miguel through his daily routines, documenting interactions with the horses, occasionally making notes in a small journal she kept tucked in her pocket. Initially, Miguel maintained a polite distance. "I don't believe science can measure connection and trust," he told her one afternoon as she set up small monitoring devices near Phantom's paddock. "Perhaps not directly," Rebecca replied, adjusting a sensor. "But we can measure their physiological effects. These non-invasive monitors track heart rate, cortisol levels, and micro-expressions in the horse's behavior patterns." Miguel watched skeptically as she installed the discrete equipment. "What exactly are you hoping to prove?" "I'm not hoping to prove anything," she answered with unexpected candor. "I'm testing a hypothesis, that emotional connections between species can be quantified through physiological markers, even when they can't be directly observed." By the end of the first week, Rebecca had amassed considerable data, particularly on Thunderstorm's responses to different human interactions. "The results are fascinating," she told Miguel and Sarah during their evening review session. "Thunderstorm's cortisol levels dropped by 60% within the first 5 minutes of your sessions." She displayed a graph on her tablet, showing the dramatic hormonal shift. For comparison, this is his response to other handlers, even those using approved calming techniques. The difference is statistically significant. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. "You're saying there's measurable evidence that Miguel's approach works faster than conventional methods?" "I'm saying there's evidence that the horse's physiological stress response recognizes something in Miguel's approach that it doesn't in others," Rebecca clarified. "The science can tell us what happens, not necessarily why." For Miguel, this validation was both gratifying and somewhat unnecessary. He didn't need scientific proof to confirm what he'd always felt intuitively. Yet he recognized the value of Rebecca's work in bridging worlds that often spoke different languages, the intuitive wisdom of his grandfather's traditions, and the evidence-based approach demanded by modern equine science. As days passed, Rebecca documented each interaction with Phantom, whose progress continued at a glacial pace. The traumatized white stallion now allowed Miguel to sit within 10 feet of him, occasionally approaching to investigate before retreating to his safe distance. Each tiny advancement was recorded, measured, and contextualized within Rebecca's growing dataset. "What you're doing intuitively," she explained one evening, "has neurological underpinnings. When you sit quietly with Phantom without demands, you're allowing his amygdala, the brain's fear center, to gradually recalibrate. Your consistent presence without threat creates new neural pathways." Miguel smiled slightly. "My grandfather would have said we're giving his spirit time to recognize ours." "Different languages for the same truth," Rebecca suggested. Their developing rapport was interrupted by Sarah's discovery of a professional symposium being organized by the Kentucky Breeders' Association. "Look at this," she said, showing them a glossy brochure. "Garcia is organizing a conference on scientific methods in equine recovery, and we weren't invited." Rebecca studied the program with a frown. "This is clearly positioned against your work. Every session emphasizes evidence-based approaches with implicit criticism of alternative methods." "It doesn't matter," Miguel shrugged, turning back to his work with Phantom. "It does matter," Rebecca insisted unexpectedly. "You need to attend. I have preliminary data that directly contradicts their claims." Miguel looked skeptical, but Sarah nodded vigorously. "She's right, Miguel. Staying away only reinforces their narrative that we're afraid of scientific scrutiny." 2 weeks later, Miguel found himself in an uncomfortable suit, entering the gleaming conference center where Garcia's symposium was underway. The uncomfortable glances and whispered comments that greeted their arrival confirmed that their presence was both noticed and unwelcome. Garcia himself stood at the podium, presenting slides filled with complex graphs. "As we can see," he was saying, "traditional methods demonstrate proven efficacy rates of 78%. While alternative approaches show inconsistent results at best and potentially harmful delays in treatment at worst." Miguel tensed, but Rebecca placed a calming hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let him finish." When the session opened for questions, Rebecca stood confidently, introducing herself as a researcher from Harvard's Comparative Behavioral Biology Department. "I'd like to present conflicting data," she stated clearly, her academic credentials silencing the murmurs that had begun. Using the conference room's projection system, Rebecca displayed her own findings, careful charts showing physiological stress markers in horses under different rehabilitation approaches. "As you can see," she explained professionally, "horses in the Thunder's Hope program show consistently lower cortisol levels and more rapid vagal tone recovery than those in traditional rehabilitation settings." A heated debate erupted, with several scientists questioning her methodology, while others leaned forward with genuine interest. The turning point came when Rebecca played a short video compilation showing the transformation of Thunderstorm over time, followed by similar progression clips of Bella Luna and the gradual improvements with Phantom. "These aren't just emotional appeals," Rebecca emphasized. "Each segment corresponds to the physiological data points in my previous slides. The behavioral changes you're seeing correlate directly with measurable neurobiological markers of reduced trauma response." Close-up shots captured the changing expressions of veterinarians and trainers in the audience, skepticism giving way to professional curiosity as Rebecca methodically connected emotional observations with hard data. Garcia, cornered by the compelling evidence, shifted his position slightly. "These results certainly merit additional investigation," he conceded reluctantly, though his expression suggested the concession pained him. After the session, they were approached by several attendees with genuine questions about Miguel's methods. A professor of equine behavior from Cornell asked particularly insightful questions about the progression timeline for severe trauma cases. "The paradigm shift here," Rebecca explained to the growing circle of interested professionals, "is moving from a compliance-based model to a trust-based model. The data suggests that though the initial progress may appear slower, the long-term outcomes show greater stability and fewer regression episodes." On the drive back to Thunder's Hope, Miguel expressed his gratitude. You translated what I feel intuitively into a language they can understand, he told Rebecca. I've never been able to do that. Different worlds need different interpreters, she replied simply. Your gift is with the horses, mine is with data. Together we might actually change some minds. The following morning, Miguel rose before dawn as usual, heading to check on Phantom before beginning the day's chores. As he approached the paddock, he stopped in surprise. Instead of retreating to the far corner, as had been his pattern, Phantom stood waiting attentively at the gate, his ears pricked forward with interest rather than tension. Miguel maintained his calm exterior, though his heart raced with excitement. Moving with deliberate slowness, he opened the gate and entered the paddock, then sat in his usual spot, making no attempt to approach the horse. For several minutes, they remained in this familiar tableau, man sitting quietly, horse observing from a distance. Then, in a moment Miguel would later struggle to describe to Rebecca's cameras, Phantom took several determined steps forward and, for the first time, voluntarily entered Miguel's personal space. The magnificent white stallion lowered his head, nostrils flaring as he took in Miguel's scent, before gently, almost imperceptibly, touching Miguel's chest with his muzzle, the equine equivalent of a handshake, an acknowledgement of tentative trust. Miguel remained perfectly still, allowing the horse to set the parameters of this first contact. Phantom held the connection for perhaps 5 seconds before stepping back, but he didn't retreat to his distant corner. Instead, he remained within a few feet, his body language more relaxed than Miguel had ever seen it. "Gracias," Miguel whispered, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you for your courage." Later that morning, as Miguel documented the breakthrough in the logbook they kept for each horse, he became aware of unusual activity at the entrance to Thunder's Hope. Cars were arriving, more than they typically saw in a week, let alone a single morning. Visitors streamed toward the main office, where Sarah was frantically trying to organize the unexpected influx. "What's happening?" Miguel asked, joining her as she handed out visitor guidelines to a group of well-dressed professionals. Rebecca's presentation went viral in equine circles, Sarah explained between greetings. These are veterinarians, trainers, university researchers, all wanting to see our methods firsthand. Among the visitors, Miguel recognized several faces from the symposium, including a prominent trainer who had publicly criticized their approach months earlier. More surprising was the arrival of 3 board members from the Kentucky Racing Commission, their presence lending institutional legitimacy to the growing interest. As the morning progressed, Miguel found himself explaining his philosophy to an attentive audience of professionals who had previously dismissed his work. Rebecca moved through the crowd with her camera, capturing the irony of the moment. The once marginalized immigrant, now surrounded by the very authorities who had attempted to discredit him. "Your approach challenges fundamental assumptions about behavioral modification," admitted Dr. Winters, a veterinary behaviorist from a prestigious equine hospital. "We've been so focused on controlling behavior that we've overlooked the importance of addressing the emotional state driving it." By mid-afternoon, the impromptu open house had evolved into something resembling a master class, with Miguel demonstrating his techniques with several horses at different stages of recovery. Most compelling to the professional audience was his session with Phantom, where the white stallion's newly established trust was evident in his willing proximity to Miguel, despite the unusual number of observers. As the visitors finally departed, leaving promises of future collaboration and support, Miguel, Sarah, and Rebecca sat exhausted but elated on the main house porch. "I never expected this," Miguel admitted, watching the last cars disappear down the driveway. "The science validated what your heart already knew," Rebecca said, reviewing footage on her camera. "Sometimes that's what it takes to change minds." Early the next morning, Miguel found Phantom waiting eagerly at his paddock gate, and for the first time, the horse approached voluntarily, touching Miguel's chest with his muzzle, while in the background, cars began to arrive in unprecedented numbers, bringing visitors, potential donors, and even former critics, now curious to learn from the man that science proved right. 1 year had transformed Thunder's Hope beyond recognition. The once neglected property now boasted freshly painted barns, meticulously maintained paddocks, and a state-of-the-art indoor arena where Miguel could work with traumatized horses regardless of weather. On this crisp autumn morning, Miguel paused at the top of the hill overlooking their sanctuary, watching the Kentucky mist rise from the valleys like spirits ascending. The latest issue of National Geographic lay open on his desk inside, his own face alongside thunderstorms gracing the cover, beneath the headline, "The Science of Connection, Revolutionizing Equine Recovery." Rebecca's article had propelled their work into mainstream consciousness, balancing emotional storytelling with rigorous scientific validation. Requests for interviews, visits, and consultations now arrived daily, each carefully filtered by Sarah to protect the peaceful environment they'd created. Miguel made his way to the main training area, where 8 students from 3 different countries waited for their morning instruction. They represented the inaugural class of Thunder's Hope training program, veterinarians, experienced trainers, and therapy specialists selected from hundreds of applicants eager to learn Miguel's methodology. "Remember," he told them as they gathered in a semicircle, "horses communicate constantly. Listen with your eyes, observe with your heart. Their bodies tell stories their voices cannot." The students watched intently as Miguel demonstrated with a recently arrived thoroughbred, a former racehorse who'd developed severe anxiety after a starting gait malfunction. The horse's muscles quivered beneath his gleaming coat, his eyes darting nervously at each new sound. Miguel stood quietly at the center of the round pen, his breathing deep and measured, his posture open but undemanding. He made no attempt to approach the anxious animal, no gesture to establish control. The students shifted uncomfortably at first, accustomed to more active training techniques. "Shouldn't you?" one began hesitantly. Miguel raised a hand gently, silencing the question. "Watch his left ear," he instructed softly. "See how it tracks me even as he circles? He's listening, assessing. Our conversation has already begun." Gradually, the thoroughbred's circuits around the pen grew smaller. His breathing slowed to match Miguel's. After 20 minutes, he stopped circling entirely, standing at a slight angle to Miguel, neither facing him directly nor turning away. It was a subtle posture of tentative interest. "The moment of choice," Miguel explained to the students. "He's deciding whether connection might be safer than isolation. This moment can't be forced or rushed." From the observation area, Sarah watched with quiet pride while explaining their methodology to a group of visiting veterinarians. "We're documenting everything now: heart rates, cortisol levels, behavioral markers. The data supports what Miguel has always known intuitively." Thunderstorm had adapted to his role as ambassador with remarkable grace. Now 10 years old, the once dangerous stallion possessed a wisdom that seemed almost supernatural to visitors witnessing him for the first time. Most striking was his ability to identify the horses in greatest distress, often positioning himself in adjacent paddocks to those most recently arrived, as if offering silent companionship in their adjustment. Even more remarkable was his sensitivity to human suffering. When veterans with PTSD or children with trauma histories visited, Thunderstorm would approach the fence line with gentle curiosity, often gravitating toward those whose pain was most pronounced but least expressed. "It's like he has emotional X-ray vision," Dr. Martinez, a child psychologist who now brought patients weekly, observed to Sarah. "He consistently selects the children who are most withdrawn, most offended. The ones even I struggle to reach sometimes." That afternoon, as Miguel supervised a training session with intermediate students, Sarah spotted a familiar black Cadillac approaching the main entrance. Harrison Wheeler III, now visibly aged but still carrying himself with authority, emerged from the passenger side. Beside him bounced an energetic girl of about 8, her blonde hair in practical braids, dressed not in the designer children's wear Sarah might have expected, but in practical riding boots and jeans. "Mr. Wheeler," Sarah greeted him, extending her hand. "This must be Emma." The girl stepped forward with surprising confidence. "Are you Dr. Jenkins? Grandpa says you're the smartest horse doctor in Kentucky." Sarah smiled, noting the genuine pride in Wheeler's expression. "Your grandfather is very kind. We're about to start our junior program orientation. Would you like to join?" Emma nodded eagerly, already scanning the paddocks for the horses she'd clearly been anticipating. Wheeler cleared his throat, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've brought the paperwork for the Scholarship Foundation," he said, handing Sarah a leather portfolio. The board approved funding for 10 students annually from underserved communities. Sarah accepted the portfolio, recalling their conversation months earlier about creating opportunities for young people with Miguel's intuitive gifts, but without his resources or connections. The Wheeler Foundation for Equine Education represented a transformation as profound as any they'd witnessed in their four-legged residence. "Miguel will be pleased," she said simply. They walked toward the junior program paddock, where 6 children between 8 and 12 years old had gathered for their first session. Miguel was introducing them to the program's special equine partners, gentle, experienced horses specifically chosen for their patience with beginners. When he spotted Wheeler and Emma, a brief shadow of memory crossed his face before dissolving into a welcoming smile. "Miss Emma," he greeted her, "we've been expecting you." Emma approached cautiously but without fear. "My grandpa said you teach differently, that you listen to the horses." Miguel knelt to her level. "The horses are the real teachers here. I just help translate sometimes." He led the children on a tour of the paddocks, explaining each horse's background and personality. When they reached Phantom's enclosure, Miguel paused. The white stallion, once so traumatized he would attack any human who approached, now stood majestically at the fence line, his intelligent eyes assessing the small visitors with calm interest. "Phantom had a difficult past," Miguel explained, his voice gentle but honest. "People expected things from him that he couldn't understand. For a long time he believed all humans would hurt him." The children listened solemnly, instinctively understanding the gravity of the horse's history. "Now he helps teach other horses that humans can be trusted," Miguel continued, "and today he's going to help teach Emma." Wheeler started forward with instinctive concern, but Sarah placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Watch," she murmured. Miguel opened the gate and invited Emma to enter with him. The other children and their parents watched breathlessly as the massive white stallion approached the small girl with deliberate slowness. Phantom lowered his magnificent head, nostrils flaring gently as he took in Emma's scent. "He's saying hello," Miguel explained softly. "You can say hello back if you'd like." Emma extended her small hand, palm up as she'd been taught. Phantom regarded it momentarily, then with exquisite gentleness, lowered his muzzle into her palm. The connection established, horse and child regarded each other with matching expressions of solemn curiosity. "He likes me," Emma whispered, awestruck. "He recognizes something in you," Miguel corrected gently. "Something that helps him feel safe." Later, as Wheeler watched his granddaughter brushing Phantom under Miguel's careful supervision, Sarah approached with architectural plans for the new learning center. "The foundations are already poured," she explained. "The classrooms should be ready by spring." "And the scholarship housing?" Wheeler inquired, still watching Emma with a grandfather's protective gaze. 20 beds to start. We've already received 40 applications for next summer's youth program." Sarah hesitated, then addressed what had once been unthinkable. "We're naming the main building after your granddaughter, the Emma Wheeler Center for Equine Education. I hope that meets with your approval." Wheeler nodded, emotion briefly tightening his features before he mastered it. "Appropriate," he said gruffly. "She's the one who saw the value here before I did." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the paddocks, Miguel found a rare moment of solitude at his favorite spot, the hilltop overlooking the entire property. Thunderstorm grazed nearby, his dark coat gleaming with health, occasionally lifting his head to check Miguel's position, a habit formed during their earliest days together that neither had abandoned. "Would you have imagined this, amigo?" Miguel asked softly, gesturing toward the bustling center below. "Who would have thought that 2 broken souls might build something so whole?" Thunderstorm approached, nickering softly, and rested his head against Miguel's chest in their familiar gesture of connection. The weight and warmth of the horse's trust still moved Miguel deeply, even after all this time. Sarah found them there as sunset painted the hills in amber and gold. She approached quietly, reluctant to disturb the moment, but drawn to share it. Thunderstorm acknowledged her with a gentle rumble, making space for her in their circle without breaking contact with Miguel. "Your father is showing the architecture students his record-keeping system," she informed Miguel with a smile. "I think he's recruited 5 new volunteers for the database project." Miguel nodded, pride warming his voice. "He's found his purpose here as much as any of us." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the day's activities wind down below. Students leading horses to evening turnout, volunteers preparing feed, visiting families reluctantly departing with promises to return. "I've been thinking," Sarah said finally, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "This past year has been about building Thunder's hope into something that can endure beyond us, something permanent." Miguel turned to her, noting the unusual vulnerability in her expression. "Yes? You haven't just taught me to see horses differently," she continued, meeting his gaze directly. "You've taught me to see everything differently. To recognize that healing isn't about fixing or controlling, but about creating space for transformation." As the last light faded from the sky, Thunderstorm drifted away to join the other horses grazing in the large communal paddock. His choice, made freely, a testament to how far he'd come from the terrified, aggressive animal Miguel had first encountered in that isolated stall. The following morning brought new beginnings as they welcomed the youngest student ever accepted to Thunder's Hope. A serious-faced Mexican-American boy of 12, clutching a battered guitar case and staring wide-eyed at the horses in their paddocks. His mother explained in rapid, nervous Spanish that the boy hadn't spoken since witnessing violence in their neighborhood, but he'd been drawn to horses and music. Miguel greeted him in Spanish, noting the boy's calloused fingertips that spoke of hours practicing guitar, the watchful eyes that missed nothing, the careful distance he maintained, all so familiar, like looking into a mirror of his younger self. As Miguel led the boy toward Thunderstorm's paddock, Sarah walking alongside them, he squeezed her hand gently and murmured, "The whispers of hope never cease. They just find new voices to express themselves."